Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the Magnepan Ultra-wideband Bass System. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, this one's a little bit different. It's pretty much a review, but it's a review of a prototype product. So you can't buy this. What we listen to might be different from what ultimately gets produced, but we want to give you an idea of what we think could be an important new product that you might be interested in, and it provides an interesting platform for a discussion of how to reproduce bass, something that's near and dear to many of our hearts. Okay, the Magnepan Ultra-wideband Bass System is tall-ish, 36-inch by about 8 to 10 inches, triangular column. And you use two of these, and they are different in the sense that they are dipole subwoofers. Yes, that means they radiate to the front and to the rear. You may be familiar with Magnepans, or you may be familiar with electrostatic planar loudspeakers. Magnepans are planar magnetic, but electrostats and planar magnetics, generally speaking, radiate to the front and the rear. They're open baffle, and that gives them some interesting and different characteristics. Particularly, it means they don't radiate to the side, and that changes how they interact with the room. We'll come back to that in a little bit. The ultra-wideband bass system operates in a similar way. You place the two triangular towers against the side wall on each side of the listening room. That might sound odd, but that is part of creating an interaction with the acoustics of the room that is beneficial. So we've got front and rear radiation, which means cancellation to the side, and that's beneficial. And we have the speaker up against the wall, which also has beneficial acoustic effects, or at least that's the theory. We'll talk in a little bit more about the listening tests that we did, and we'll see if all of this seems to work. But as a preview, I wouldn't be here if it weren't interesting. So you have four woofers on each side. I believe they're 6-inch drivers, so you've got 16 woofers total, but they're relatively small. Making them relatively small allows Magnepan to do something else that is interesting, which is they can extend the frequency response of the subwoofer up into the upper mid-range. You might wonder why the heck would they want to do that? And the simple reason for that is something that's called the Schrader frequency. Not to get too technical, but your room has resonances, and those resonances are problematic, especially at bass frequencies. They're problematic because they emphasize some frequencies and they don't emphasize other frequencies, and that means you get uneven bass response. This isn't the fault of your speaker per se, it's the nature of having a loudspeaker in a real room with real dimensions. The Schrader frequency is the frequency at which those room modes get to be so clustered together that you don't really get uneven response. You might get little ripples, but you're not getting a big peak, let's say, at 35 hertz, and then a huge dip at 50 hertz, and then another big peak at 72 hertz, and so on. The room modes add together in a way that smooths out the response. In any event, in a reasonably sized domestic room, the Schrader frequency is typically between 150 and 200 hertz. Let's call it 200 hertz for the sake of discussion, since many people will have slightly smaller listening rooms, and that will push the Schrader frequency up a little bit higher. What that means is if you're going to use a subwoofer to smooth out the bass response and give you even bass, you need a subwoofer that can go up at least to the Schrader frequency. So it's a little bit odd what I'm telling you, but this is a very important observation that a number of people have made, but Magnepan is very focused on this kind of idea. We need to build the subwoofer so it goes up high enough that it can operate in a band that allows us to really deal with the room modes that you've got in your room. So the subwoofer needs to be able to go up to at least 200 hertz is their thinking. But actually, because you're then going to roll it off, it needs to even be able to go higher. And if you did, let's say, a 6 dB per octave roll off, and you wanted it to be 12 dB down, it would need to go to, 400 hertz, that's 6 dB down, and another 6 dB down to get to 12 dB down would be 800 hertz. But really it should go higher than that, and that leads you to wanting a subwoofer that at 18 or 24 dB down is still working fine at 1600 or 3200 hertz. I hope with that quick example you can kind of see you really would ideally like your subwoofer to go up into the mid-range so that it isn't adding to the unevenness of the frequencies, and so when you deploy it, it can work below the Schrader frequency to help you even out the bass in your room. Because for accurate bass, we need to have relatively smooth bass. So the interesting ideas in the Magnepan Ultra-wideband Bass System are A, dipole, so that you cut down the number of axes on, I should have said before, by the way, subwoofers in general, regular subwoofers, one woofer in a cabinet, are omnidirectional. So by making it dipole, you have no output on the lateral dimension to the woofer. That reduces its interaction with the room, and then on top of that, you make it ultra-wideband, and by making it ultra-wideband, you end up being able to go well beyond the Schrader frequency, and the subwoofer's own strange roll-off isn't upsetting the operation of the whole system. So that's the basic idea behind the UBS. It is a passive woofer, so you have to use an external power amplifier. Magnepan came to our listening room, set up the system. They used electronics, so we had a single stereo amplifier on the two UBS woofers, and I think 100 or 150 watts per channel, so not a giant amplifier for sure. And we paired them with an interesting combination, but basically with an electrostatic speaker to demonstrate that the UBS could work effectively with a very quick, highly respected form of loudspeaker, which was an electrostat, but a form of loudspeaker that's often thought to have difficulty reproducing low frequencies. So that was the demonstration conditions, and I'll be back in a minute to talk about how it sounded. Okay, so we've got a tall but small footprint column up against our side walls, and we're listening to basically electrostatic loudspeakers as the main system. How did it sound? Well, the first thing that was interesting was Magnepan, to demonstrate that when they say ultra-wideband, they really mean ultra-wideband, played the woofers alone. And everyone who was on site listening agreed that the woofers alone made a pretty good speaker. The high frequencies weren't perfect, and because they were placed up against the sidewalls, the imaging was a little bit unusual. There was kind of a hole in the middle, and the image was perhaps wider than it should have been, but the general sound quality was surprisingly high in the mid-range. Very enjoyable. On top of that, the bass was very detailed and impressive. So they wanted to show kind of that the ultra-wideband idea was real. I would say very clearly it is a real thing. It's not just, marketing copy. All right, but that doesn't really matter because what you want to know is how it works when it's integrated with a system. So let me go through a couple of qualities that I heard. One, Magnepan was on site for less than a day, and it took them about 2 hours just to unbox all the equipment and get it plugged in. And then we did this little demonstration I mentioned, and then we started playing music on the full system and trying to dial in the setup. The first thing that impressed me about the UBS was we were able to get it to where it sounded very well integrated, much better than the typical subwoofer with small satellite speakers. And you could use the UBS with small satellite speakers. I want to be very clear about that. But the typical individual sub, forward-facing or downward-facing, integrated with satellites, just takes a lot longer to get right. And it is often the case that you don't get to the level of integration that Magnepan was able to achieve in, I would say, about 3 hours of listening. And I would make comments and they would do some adjustments, and shazam, there we were. Pretty well integrated bass. I would say about as well integrated as you would get with a typical speaker that's in the $10,000 range. I thought that was, I was surprised. Let me put it that way. It's not easy to do on-site integration well with a set of speakers that weren't originally designed just to be plugged in and off you go. All right, so integration was very good, and that means the bass sounded like it was part of the overall sound stage, and the musicians who were playing instruments that go between low and mid frequencies didn't move around, and their character didn't change significantly. They sounded like they were part of a unified whole. All right, I really like that, and I like the fact that it didn't take them very long to get this set up. Now they have experience with this equipment. They know what they're doing, so they're a step ahead of you and me. But nonetheless, it didn't seem to be that hard. Another thing I liked about the setup, by the way, is they didn't really spend a lot of time moving the speakers. The adjustments were done with the electronics. I thought that was pretty cool. All right, so that part sounded excellent. The power in the bass was superb. It was rich, and it was detailed, and it was punchy, and we played some dance style tunes, and it was get up and bop around kind of time. I do have a question about how well the UBS works at very low frequencies. Most of what we played was popular material that I don't think has its main operating area as 20 to 40 hertz, let's say. So I'm not trying to throw shade on how it works at those frequencies. I just don't know. Technically, there's reason to believe that it might be a little bit difficult for a dipole woofer to go super low, but it certainly sounded excellent. on the material that we played, and I don't think you would miss it. The third piece that I've alluded to, but I just want to say that I really liked about this was I think this woofer can be integrated with a wide variety of systems. So the mini monitors I mentioned before, which many people have, and there are some great mini monitors out there. Stand mount speakers is what I'm talking about. There's some great stand mount speakers out there, but oftentimes, the 120 hertz and below area just could use a little more foundation, a little more definition, a little more punch. I think the UPS would work very well in that kind of environment because the best mini monitors are fast and clear and just have a detailed, transparent sound, and that's the character of the bass that I heard on the ultra-wideband bass system. So I think would work very nicely with mini monitors. As I said, we listened with electrostatics, which I think Magnepan's idea was that's about the hardest test we can throw at this thing. So it ought to impress you that we've built a really good woofer if we can make it integrate with electrostats. So that was cool. And of course, you could also use it with Magnepans because magneplaners, like electrostatics, are dipoles and they have a natural bass roll-off. That means you would probably like to augment or fine-tune the bass in some way. So the third application that I see is with Magnepans, but specifically Magnepan is designing a high-end speaker that's a smaller form factor than their typical top-of-the-line systems, which are quite large, so that you can enjoy the full Magnepan experience, UBS plus this new Magnepan for condominiums or for apartments or for smaller rooms. And they say, I haven't heard it, they say you can enjoy the whole shebang. So you have a woofer that can work with a new Magnepan speaker that's designed for small rooms, that could work with regular Magnepans that already exist, like, these are LRS pluses, could work with electrostats, and could work with mini monitors and integrate with all of those very demanding and difficult speakers. So I have to say, I'm kind of excited about it. The one thing is we don't really know the price point. And depending on where they price it, well, there may be more alternatives that are competitive with what Magnepan is doing. However, I will also say, ever the optimist, that given Magnepan's history of producing products with really high value, I think it's quite possible that this will come in at not low, but at a reasonable price point for what it is. So we'll see. Who knows? I mean, 16 woofers can't be cheap, but fingers crossed. I hope you've enjoyed this. We would like to give you more previews of some product that's coming down the pike, but in any event, we're kind of excited about this one because bass is very, very hard in real rooms. We would love it if you would subscribe. We would love it if you would visit us on the web at hifiplus.com. And if you're so inclined, we of course invite you to subscribe to the magazine. Anyway, for YouTube work, subscribe, click here as you see on screen or in the show notes below. Thanks for joining us.